Reddit, what's the scariest/most unnerving situation you've been in? 1992, Croatia, Christmas. I was 5 years old, living in a city on the border with Bosnia-Herzegovina/Republic of Srpska. We got a care package of sorts from some relatives in Germany which included candy, some really nice smelling soap, powdered milk, which later led to a family anecdote, and one SNES. I hooked up the SNES to our black and white TV and played for all of 10 minutes when the Serbs decided to ruin Christmas by gifting us some artillery strikes. This in itself wasn't that unusual. I was used to very loud explosions at that point. What happened next was, one of the artillery shells fell really close and turns out it hit the neighbor's house, where my best friend lived with his family, as much as any 5-year-old can have a best friend, anyway. After the shelling stopped, we left the house to see if they needed help/gawk at the ruin/collect bomb fragments cause we kids played with that. We walked out and I heard this weird sound, like crying and gagging and screaming all at once. I've never heard anything like it before or since. When we got close enough to the neighbor's house, we saw the father of the family, walking in circles at the front lawn, making the sound. When he turned around, it turned out he was carrying the severed upper body of his dead 5-year-old son. Now, the weird part is that it didn't really affect me emotionally at the time. I stopped speaking to anyone for a month because of a case of child logic. A few days before he died there was a TV report which I misinterpreted as meaning that the enemy could hear everything we say and do, whereas the report actually meant they were listening to unsecured radio transmissions and, being 5, I understood that they killed him because we were friends, and if I don't have any more friends, nobody else would die. Anyway, it only came around like 5 years later. I started having nightmares every night, wetting the bed, acting antisocially, crying for no reason, etc. Had some therapy, am fine now. Having a friend who had mental problems exacerbated by how drunk he was slam me into my garage door and press a knife so hard into my face my gums bled for 30 minutes. The worst part was a bunch of my friends were banging on the door trying to get in and I was holding the handle closed with my hand behind my back. I was pretty positive I could talk him down myself since we were close friends, but if anyone came barging in I was pretty positive it was going from bad to way worse. My fiancée and I got an Uber back to our apartment after going out downtown one night. It was her friend's birthday so she went a little too hard and fell asleep in the Uber. I chatted with the guy all the way back as I was pretty drunk too. When we got to our, relatively new, apartment, I woke her up and she exclaimed, "I don't live here. Take me home," and proceeded to argue with me about living there. To the driver, it seemed like I was trying to abduct her, I assume. He got very protective of her, so I tried to play it calm and get her to wake up and recognize where we were. Eventually she did, and he seemed very relieved. It made me wonder how often drivers have to deal with that kind of thing. I was annoyed at the time but now I really appreciate him being a little protective of a random mid-20s girl in his car. I went skating with a friend when I was 8. His brother was 15 at the time and brought a friend too. Turns out this friend had an abusive father and the family was hiding him. Somehow his dad found out where we were and came to the skating rink to get his son. He must have waited in the parking lot, because when we came out the door he yelled and started charging. Everyone ran to get in the car and in the confusion, I couldn't get in. The crazy dad was leaning in the car so my friend's mom gunned it and they took off. There I was, 8 years old, in the parking lot with a crazy man. He turned around and I booked it back into the skating rink. Got the guy at the counter to let me use the phone so I could call my folks. My folks never let me stay over at that friend's house again. Being upside down in a car that is sinking. All electrical has shorted and the water pressure prevents opening the doors. I was quite fortunate. Younger me, maybe about 13 to 14, was on a ship to Spain. At night I sneaked up onto the deck and didn't know how strong the wind would be. As soon as I went outside I was blown across the deck and slammed into the side of a railing. I could well have been chucked off the edge and never be found. Nobody would have known and I couldn't swim. It was absolutely terrifying and I was very lucky. I crawled back inside and never did that again. A guy jumped out of a car and put a gun to my face thinking I was someone else. Convoy got hit by 3 landmines on one stretch of road near Baiji, Iraq. One of the trucks caught fire. EOD went flying past our intersection and as soon as they got around the corner of the first building I saw a massive fireball erupt, followed by machine gun fire from further in Baiji. A squad of QRF infantry guys pulled up, got out, and wedged up to a house by the side of the road, then cleared it. A C-130 flew over the top of the area dropping flares. That was the Friday night of Ramadan in Baiji, Iraq, and I wish I had recorded it. Baiji always hated us. It blows me away to see recent videos of fighting in the area, and to recognize some of the bigger buildings. Edit, here is that very intersection, for anyone interested. We were heading west along Hyundai Highway, just before Highway 1. The EOD team got hit just north of that intersection. I had to talk to several police officers while tripping on 4 hits of LSD because my friend who had taken 2 hits had a bad trip and called the police on himself. Staring at the barrel of a gun pointed at me by the guy stealing my car. Look at something that's 2 feet away from you right now. Now imagine that if the guy who is unstable enough to steal a car for drug money moves his finger half an inch, a bullet will come out of it and rip through your body. Having a 155mm high explosive artillery round land and detonate 25 meters in front of me. Had it not been a low-angle shot, me and about 50 other people would be dead. That spinning moment I lost control. The car to my left on the highway pulled into my lane. He was going to hit me. I tried to avoid him. I slammed on my brakes and pulled right. I thought I knew what was in my blind spot. I thought wrong. My right rear corner tagged the left front bumper of a SUV behind me. Suddenly the world was in slow motion yet moving far too fast. I had no control. I was spinning wildly around and around as I flew off the road. A sheet of snow kicked up as I hit the ditch. But in the slow motion through the obscuring spray I saw hints of a cement drain pipe. I was tossed around in my seatbelt like a rag doll. I was sure this was it. Then crunch. I hit the drain pipe. Stopped dead. I think I lost consciousness for a moment. When I came to, a truck driver had pulled over and was trying to help me out of the mangled wreck. I couldn't see well. It took me almost a minute to realize my glasses had been thrown clear during the crash. He helped me find them. I was shaking. I was in shock. I was incoherent. As we finally managed to find my glasses and get my seatbelt loose, I looked over and saw what had been my passenger side door. The distorted metal was wrapped around the concrete drain and inches from my right arm. The passenger seat was just gone, obliterated. I was incredibly lucky to basically walk away. The SUV ended up across the road and was overturned in the other ditch. They rolled a time or two. They basically came out unscathed as well, a few minor lacerations. We were all incredibly lucky given what we just survived. A couple months ago I hit a deer on the interstate, while passing a semi, traveling over 70 miles per hour. The truck and I were nearly neck and neck, and just as I was having ground to pass, there was a deer. For lack of better expression, I only had one frame of setting it before it was brown and red mist on my windshield. Also, it set off my airbag and windshield wipers. Smoke has filled the cabin. Deer guts have now been smeared and dried on the windscreen, and I'm still traveling at least 65 miles per hour on the freeway, parallel to a semi traveling the same speed. Luckily the trucker had to have seen what happened, and by the time I looked in my rear and side mirrors he has backed off and given me room to pull over. I very nearly got vacuumed up into that 18-wheeler's undercarriage thanks to that deer attempting suicide by highway. Needless to say I was in shock. I still haven't completely recovered. I now have zero tolerance for shitty drivers, not that that was a factor, as things on the road are incredibly dangerous as is. I had the back of my head stomped a couple times by an irate fellow inmate while I was barely awake. The day before, he'd tried to pick a fight with an older, weaker dude, so that morning's conversation, between me and the old dude, after breakfast consisted of, "Old dude, why would he do that? I've never bothered him or anything, me. Because he's young and stressed over his woman and kid, so he wants to take it out on someone. If he tried that on one of us younger cats, he'd probably have a fight on his hands, and he didn't want that." 2 hours later I was awakened by a dude standing over me, saying something about keep his name out my mouth. It took me a while to realize what he was talking about, or that he was being aggressive, because I wasn't awake yet. By the time I saw his intents and decided I'd better address the situation, it was too late. The moment I sat up and put my feet to the floor, I was knocked backwards off my bunk, hit a few more times, and had my face stomped. I got my feet underneath me with the thought, I'm about to FCK this, racial expletive, up, only to have the back of my head stomped. I quickly amended my line of thinking to, I'm gonna stick my head under this bunk so he can't stomp it anymore. Someone pulled him back. I finally made it to my feet, and I went full ragga mode. I tried calling him everything I could think of, except that racial expletive, I'm not suicidal much, to entice him into attacking me again. He wouldn't. Nothing is scarier than a man who's had his head stomped on, then jumps up and begs you try that again while he's standing, I guess. We saw each other again while waiting for court. They forget things about who can't be in a cell with whom, and he came up to me and apologized. This is mild compared to what a lot of people have gone through, but it's my answer. My dad was pretty normal, from my perspective, until I was about 10. He was kind of goofy and hyperactive, but whatever. Right around my 10th birthday though his drinking escalated, which exacerbated his undiagnosed bipolar disorder. By the time I entered high school things had gotten very bad. He would lose track of reality and go into these insane violent rages over the smallest things, and it was impossible to guess what was going to set him off. I was 16, it was Christmas break, and my friends and I went to the movies to see King Kong. My dad was supposed to be picking us up. He called and told me which parking lot he was waiting in, but I got mixed up and went to the wrong exit, so he waited about 10 minutes for us to find the car. For the entire 30-minute drive home he raged at me for keeping him waiting, calling me stupid, accusing me of being on drugs, calling me a whore and a bitch and a disappointment. I was in the front passenger seat, and as he screamed at me he would reach over and hit me or slap me or yank my hair. My friends were all in the back seat and were horrified. No one knew what to do or what to say. Eventually someone thought to call my mom, and she talked him down over the phone. It was just one of many incidents like that, but I think this was the worst for me because even though it wasn't as violent as most of the others, as a 16-year-old having your friends see something like that was a nightmare. And unlike at home, I couldn't get away from him. He got himself cleaned up and medicated eventually when I was in college, but the damage was done. My mother left him during the worst of it, and he's no longer a part of my life. I've had 2 panic attacks in my life, but the first was insane, mainly because I felt I was going insane and didn't know if my brain would ever adjust. The attack lasted about 30 minutes. It was at the end of college, and I'm 110% positive it was fear of not getting a job after school, if I had learned enough, etc. It was literally 30 minutes of every thought, every dream, every nightmare, every face, conversation, etc. spinning like a tornado. My family just moved to a new city. We stay right in the middle of a bad neighborhood and there are like liquor stores and stuff. I walked down to ask about a job and get a soda like last week and this guy started talking to me. He was nice and kinda cute and he asked if I wanted to go play video games and smoke a bowl. I'm broke as hell, depressed and I know 0 people around here. I said yes. We went to his place where there were a few people, girls and guys mixed, all playing Mortal Kombat and smoking joints. It was cool. He had some nice furniture and the biggest TV I ever saw. I was surprised because on the outside, his place looked worse than mine. He had nice shit, though. Anyway, we are talking. I play a few rounds of Mortal Kombat and we eventually go to his back balcony to smoke more and talk and stuff. I took a seat and he sat beside me. He was obviously interested and when he asked to rub my feet, I said sure. I had on sandals and he slipped them off. We started talking about his job as an armored truck driver and everything was going well. Then he started sucking my toes. Now, I've had my toes sucked. It's okay, but I had been walking the dirty city streets in sandals and he didn't care. I finished the joint and let him. We kept talking and it was still mostly okay and he started to do it again. I pulled away and he put my sandals back on and we went into the house and played GTA. Out of nowhere he starts offering me various amounts of money to do oral on me and suck my toes. I would turn him down and he'd go back to playing and then whenever he had a reason to speak to me, he'd say okay, how about this much and throw a number. I seriously considered but I didn't want to get into a situation where if it went badly, I couldn't tell anyone. I kept saying no. My heart was beating fast and I was nervous and kinda sad because I knew he only started speaking for my feet and eventually I just left. I'm poor as shit and I should have taken the money. He was a good toe licker. I didn't have it as bad as some of these people, but for me, it was when I was swimming in a lake and all of a sudden I see a whole bunch of snakes' heads pop out of the water and start coming towards me. I've had a gun put in my mouth while sitting in my car, and a box cutter to my throat while half hanging off of a building roof downtown Nashville. Thinking I was dying. Woke up choking on vomit, couldn't breathe for a solid 30 to 60 seconds. Gasping for air and not breathing. Went to specialist, they could never find out what it was. This happened a few months back. I work nights and usually finish around midnight. On this night I finished work, got in my car and noticed I was low on petrol. I drive to a petrol station close to my house and pull up to the Bowser. As I park, I check my pockets for my wallet. I'd left it at home. I pull out of the petrol station onto the main road and turn down a side street to try and make my way home through back streets. As I'm driving down this small road I realize I'd taken a turn too early, but I continue on to see if I could get home from here. The road curves to the right and I stop at a T-section. Left goes back to where I had just come from, right is the direction of home. I go right. I turn and see a no-through road sign. God damn it, I stop and reverse out of the road to turn around and I'm suddenly blinded by high beams in my rearview mirror. I assume nothing of it and drive back towards the main road. I check my mirror again and this car with high beams on has started to move. It's right up my ass now. I'm kind of worried, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. I reach the end of the road, turn left onto the main road and this car is now following very closely behind me. It then changes lanes to get beside me. I now see that it's a big black SUV and it's almost touching the side of my car. I start to freak out. I turn down the next side street and hope that he doesn't follow. I check my mirrors and watch as he crosses over 2 lanes and speeds right up behind me again. What is going on? I step on it. Weaving down these back streets trying to lose him. He's right behind me the whole time, still blinding me with his headlights. I'm now pissed off. I haven't done anything wrong, why is this guy following me? It can't be a cop because he'd have just flashed his red and blues at me. I come up to a T-section and slam my brakes on. He stops. The front of his car filling my back window. I sit there for a moment and watch to see what he does. I indicate to go to the right and slowly begin to turn. As I drive away the SUV remains in the middle of the road, watches me and then heads in the opposite direction. What just happened? Did I almost die? I'm freaked out, but I need fuel. I make my way home, grab my wallet and head back to the petrol station. I pull in and fill up. As I'm screwing the fuel cap back on, a black SUV pulls in. There's no way it's the same one. I act casual and begin to walk towards the cashier. The SUV cuts me off and stops. I stop. My heart pounding in my head. He winds down his window, I see his face, he's bearded and covered in tattoos and staring at me. Am I seriously going to die at a petrol station in my work uniform? He asks why I turned down that side street. I ask which one. He says the dead-end street. In my panicked state I spew out the whole story about how I needed fuel but I forgot my wallet and had to go home and took a wrong turn etc. etc. As it turns out he was working as a security guard for a mansion down that street and they'd had several break-ins the week before. Apparently I looked suspicious. I paid for my petrol, drove home and threw my undies in the wash. There was a Blockbuster to close soon, so they had crazy discounts on everything. On the way home from school, I went in with a couple of friends. I was casually looking at movies while my friends ran off to look at Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Turns out they jacked shit tons of decks and hid the packaging behind movies. There was only one guy working, the cashier. My friend bought one small boost pack. Walking out, I had no idea they stole. The second we were out of there, they told me to run. We had to run on the side of the parking lot, and jump over a giant fence. There I was, a short-ass little Asian girl with Timberland boots, overly baggy bell-bottom jeans, and a giant Gap hoodie. My big friend jumped over no problem, but there I was thinking WTF, I definitely can't get over that fence. At that point, the cashier runs out screaming "You asshole's only a couple of yards away," though he can't see us. Dramatically, I say, "Go on without me," but my friend jumps back over and hoists me up. I scraped my thigh from the top of the fence, which cut into my jeans. Regardless, we make it out and run home via back roads as we hear police cars on the main street. Had a job interview in Har-Hostam, Israel and told the Arabic cab driver who spoke little English where I needed to go. Little did I know there was another neighborhood called Har Hatzafim near eastern Jerusalem. After the ride went way too long, I noticed this was nowhere where I needed to be and said, "Is there har hot seam?" and he has no idea what I'm saying. I tell him where I need to be and he says here is har hots off him. Finally, after back and forth, I say this is the wrong place and now I'm going to be late, and he refuses to understand that, so I get out without paying and start walking. He then yells a bunch and then parks his cab and starts following me. Soon another cab driver joins and I start evading them and hide in an old Arabic cemetery. I notice the cabs circling around looking for me. I am also in Arabic town with no Hebrew lettering visible anymore and just Arabic, basically like being in Compton or something. So I hide in the cemetery hearing this guys yelling in Arabic from their cabs until I am able to walk about a mile or so away and find another cab. I was an hour late and explained how the cab driver took me wrong place and couldn't understand what I was saying and still got the job. 13 years old and playing video games in my room at like 3 to 4 in the morning one late summer's night. My older brother busts through my door completely covered in blood, as drunk as can be, and shows me his hand that was practically sliced open. You could see bone and tendons, before lying down and passing out on my couch from blood loss. Think it was one of the only times I had to call 911, and the paramedic who came and had to dress the wound before they took him to the hospital said it was one of the nastiest wounds he'd ever seen in all his years of work. When I was a bit younger than that, 11, my father sliced the back of his right hand open. He was cutting tile with a grinder and the tile was too large to fit. So he removed the guard. He knows better, but for some reason he did it that day. The blade flew off and came at him. Sliced it down to the bone. It went through the tendons. About 20 years later we are working on something and I'm watching him use that hand. It moves normally. I remember the weeks/months of therapy where he worked on it after surgery to reattach the tendons. It was amazing. It looked normal, so I asked him if he ever had any problems out of that hand. I'd never really asked about the accident before. He tells me that it's more or less normal. He refers to occasional episodes where it gets hung and he has to roll the wrist to get it moving again. Then he tells me about what causes the accident, how it was his own fault, and how when the blade was coming for him he was so glad his hand was there. He moved it to intercept. I asked, "What? It was heading for your face? Your chest?" "No." He just stared at me. "Ah. There. So, there you have it." In a choice between potentially losing his hand or, that my father picked a hand. Probably most guys would. Background: my neighborhood is off a 2-lane highway that is very congested during rush hours. There's no left turn lane, so when you need to make a left into my neighborhood, the cars behind you have to move over to the right in a short lane to go around you, while you wait for a gap in the oncoming traffic. One evening, when I was about 17, I was driving home from a friend's house that was about 2 miles east of my house. So I needed to make a left turn into my neighborhood. I remember doing the usual routine. I put my left turn signal on way in advance and pumped my brakes a few times in succession, trying to get the driver's attention behind me, so they know that I'm slowing down and they need to either stop or go around me. As I started to slow down until I made it to where I needed to wait for a gap to turn left, I remember there being a lot of oncoming traffic, so I was going to have to be patient. The next series of events happened within a span of about 3 seconds. But felt like they all happened in slow motion. I look up into my rearview mirror and watch as a few cars move to the right lane to go around me. The next car I see is a tan Lincoln Continental coming up behind me, so I thought to myself that it was probably just turning left like me since it didn't move over to the right. I moved my eyes back to the road to check if a gap opened up so I could turn, which there wasn't, so I checked my rearview mirror again. I suddenly realized that the car coming up behind me was approaching at a very fast speed and not slowing down. He was going to hit me. I had nowhere to go. There were cars in front of me, the ones that had gone around me. Since it's a short right lane, they were forced to be directly in front of me almost immediately. There were cars to the right of me, the ones that were currently avoiding hitting me, and there were cars to the left of me, the oncoming traffic. With no other options, I hold on tight to the steering wheel and brace myself for impact. I remember the beauty of the orange and yellow sky setting over a dark green lush canopy of trees on both sides of the highway in front of me. I remember hearing the faint sound of a lawn mower cutting grass somewhere close by being drowned out by the calm yet upbeat Rastafarian music playing in my car. I closed my eyes and started screaming. I remember hearing the metal crunch and scrape as my small Honda Civic was hit from behind, while simultaneously feeling through my bones the abrupt and forceful impact of a car hitting me at 60 miles per hour. My head was thrown back and hit the seat's headrest, giving me really bad whiplash. My legs were forced upwards where my shins/knees met the bottom of the steering wheel. The force of the impact launched my body backwards and made the seat get thrown back to its farthest setting away from the steering wheel, as well as being thrown to lay all the way back. I remember feeling as if I was spinning. I heard horns honk, tires screech, glass shatter, all the typical sounds you hear in movies during a car accident. Then my car comes to a complete stop. At this point, I'm hugging my knees and laid all the way back in my seat. Then, the alarming sound of a deep horn forces me to open my eyes as it whizzes by on my left side. I'm now on the other side of the road facing the direction that was the oncoming traffic while I was waiting to turn, but up on the curb of the right turn lane that goes into my neighborhood. The horn was from an 18-wheeler that just missed T-boning me at full speed by like 1/16 of a second. I somehow managed to be pushed into oncoming traffic, but with such force that I made it across to the other side, and didn't hit or get hit by any other vehicles. So, my car ended up being totaled. The gas tank had been thrown off and was found a few yards away. The entire back of my car was crushed in. I'm glad I had no passengers, especially sitting in the back. I was in shock, and of course every family member that I had called didn't answer until my father finally checked the message I left about 30 minutes later. Police came, some people stopped to see if everyone was okay. Turns out the guy that hit me wasn't paying attention, he was looking down and texting, which is why he didn't notice to move over to the right. Since then, there had been another accident identical to mine, but the driver that was hit and pushed into oncoming traffic was killed. Then, mine and surrounding neighborhoods fought for the addition of a left turning lane, a widening of the highway, and additional signs warning drivers to pay attention for left turning vehicles. Unexpected gunshots in a residential area. It's happened to me several times, including just 3 hours ago. It usually turns out to be some drunk idiot that couldn't wait to try out their new gun. Got one. I was driving on the turnpike between Wichita and Kansas City. I had already been driving since Houston, non-stop, and I was exhausted and just wanted to get home. For context, if you've never been on this turnpike, it is totally desolate. Maybe one exit in the entire span. Jersey barriers on both sides of the highway. Zero other traffic that night. The skies opened up and it rained like I've never seen before. I couldn't see the hood of my car, let alone the road. I was driving a pickup truck, and I decided if I went 5 miles per hour, even if I hit the barrier, it was better than just sitting there. The water started to rise, and it started covering my floorboards. At this point I'm really panicked, but I kept moving. 7 hours later, I got to KC and pried my hands off the wheel. Turns out, a family of 4 had gotten washed away and drowned while driving down the same stretch that night. I was only okay because my pickup truck was bigger than their sedan. Story 2. Rented a boat on a man-made lake in Missouri. Went out near the dam and started swimming. Having a great time, me and my brother jumping in and being hooligans. Suddenly, I jump in and I'm in trouble. There is a ridiculous undertow and it's pulling me down and towards the dam at the same time. I'm swimming at 100% just to keep my nose out of the water, and I'm tiring out fast. Get pulled under, fight back out one last time, knowing it was my last bit of strength. Life ring hits me in the face and I'm pulled to safety. The person had thrown the ring no less than 20 yards and hit me right in the face with it. Very lucky to escape that day. Turned out they had opened the dam to lower the water level and I was caught in the undercurrent. I've been in a few bad situations in my life. I've almost been hit by an idiot teenager in a truck who crashed through a wall. My sperm donor tried several times to kill me and my family. I also fought a lot of kids on a daily basis in my high school years. But my most terrifying night was the night my brother had his stroke. I was out walking my dog when I came home to an ambulance in the driveway. I was in a panic because I didn't know if it was stepdad or my mom. It turned out, of course, to be my brother. He was being wheeled out on a gurney and he gave me a thumbs up. I had to stay home to hold down the fort, but my mom and stepdad had gone with him. After many hours of waiting and fretting, I get a call from my mom saying he's going to be fine. As it turned out though, fine was relative. He was in a coma for a month after. Earlier this year, when I had a pregnancy scare. Long story short, I slept with this girl who ended up being batshit crazy. She refused to get a pregnancy test, and she refused to take any kind of medication to terminate the pregnancy prior to her literally getting pregnant. To make matters worse, in a matter of 2 weeks flat, She was showing literally every single pregnancy symptom known to man, not exaggerating at all. I thought my life was over. Turns out, her medication for non-craziness causes the same symptoms as pregnancy, including but certainly not limited to vaginal discharge, increased urination, and fatigue. Also the one when I woke up in the hospital after having been in a major car wreck and asking where my best friend was. When the nurses wouldn't answer me, I was terrified that she was dead. Luckily she only had a few scratches and bruises. I was flipping a paddleboat in a lake with a friend by leaning on the front so the water filled the footwell, where the pedals were, and it would stand straight up on end for a few seconds before flipping. We would then race to the top to jump off the top. I jumped off, and thought because I pushed off it would fall the other way. As I resurfaced, the paddleboat bobbed and came back directly on my head. I felt a shock run down my body to my fingers and toes, and I slowly sank to the bottom, roughly 10 feet, with no use of my body, and watched as my friend swam around the paddleboat looking for me. What seemed like an eternity later, I got movement back in my limbs, was able to scramble to the surface and make my way to shore. I didn't have my life flash before my eyes, but I saw my funeral where my mother was crying. In the Navy, when I was a deck seaman, I was on the paint float, floating scaffolding, and had just crushed my hand against the ship and the float. Very windy day and it was swaying back and forth, and had to jump from the float to the ship with one working hand, and it was a decent sized drop to the water and plenty of chance of hitting my head on the float and drowning. Was sat in traffic in Birmingham city centre waiting to go out for the day with my girlfriend when some guy just walked up and started smashing my windscreen shield on my car with his elbow. He also did this to another car. Completely ruined our day. Was really unnerving. He later abused a policeman and, possibly the worst of it, spat on a nurse who was trying to bandage his elbows. Another one was kayaking in the pitch black, not knowing if there was any rocks or rapids coming up. I was mugged about 4.5 years ago. I was in my hometown of 45,000 people. We have a couple of rough neighborhoods, but I know where and where not to go, as I've lived here all my life. I was coming home from taking finals at my college, commuter student, and I just rolled into town, when I realized that my car kind of felt like it had a flat tire. I pulled over to a gas station to check it out. The parking lot was full of trucks filling up, so I pulled into the alley right behind the gas station, to be out of people's way. It was noon, broad daylight, and there were plenty of people around. This particular neighborhood was a little rough, but not one of the ones that were genuinely dangerous. I could literally see my old middle school 2 blocks away, and I'd played in this exact alley as a child with my friends. I felt safe, so, got pulled over and parked in the alley, and got out, knelt down to check my front left tire. Almost instantly, I heard maybe 3 footsteps on the gravel behind me, and I hear "Yo, stand up." I got a horrible feeling before even turning around. I slowly turned my head to see a gun being pointed in my face. The man repeated his order for me to stand up, so I did so. I remember his face just looked so hard and cold. His eyes were just hard. I just knew, right then, that if I did the wrong thing he would hurt, or even kill me. I remember he kind of looked like Eminem, with brown hair. He had his hoodie up, but I could see his entire face. He kept the gun pointed right in my face and goes, "I want whatever you got." Money. I had nothing. I had books, that was it. I had no money, and had left my wallet at home that morning, by accident. I didn't even have my bank card. I wasn't wearing any jewelry. I just had textbooks. I held my hands out and said, "I don't have anything." He goes, "Bullshit, I want whatever you got. Any money." And when he said this, he waved the gun around, gesturing with it without taking it off my face. His face was just so. I don't know. I could see he was furious and I was genuinely scared of what he was going to do. I just knew he was going to do something. I could see his anger rising and I started shaking. I repeated what I'd said and patted my jean pockets down to show him they really were just empty, and I said, "I'm sorry, I really just don't have anything. You can check my car. I just have nothing on me." And he cut me off by letting off a string of expletives, and then he took the hand he was holding his gun in, crossed it over the other side of his body, brought his hand across my face and cracked the butt of his gun across my right cheekbone so hard I dropped to the ground. The dude pistol whipped me. And then he ran off. I genuinely feel, just from the feeling I got from him, if that makes sense, that the gun wasn't loaded. Because if it had been, I think he'd have shot me. I think he hit me with it instead, because he just didn't have any bullets in it at the moment. I still get goosebumps remembering the way he looked at me. I was actually mugged again, in another place of course, about 2 years later, and that guy, or should I say that kid, did not scare me like that. He didn't give me that dark, cold feeling. But that dude with the gun. He'd have killed me if he'd have been able to, and it was really scary reading that on his face, and knowing something was about to happen. Used to live next to a cornfield, in Halifax, Pennsylvania. At the end of the season, it would be harvested, leaving these 6-inch long death spikes in the field. Neighbor kid and I were playing near the field and he fell on the death spike. His eyeball was impaled by the corn dagger and his eye was stuck on the death spike. The dangle cords in the back his eye snapped. I can still hear the sound. My Rottweiler puppy heard him screaming, ran across the road towards us and was hit by a truck. God. The blood that day. R.I.P. I and dog. When I was in the Marine Corps, fresh out of school and new to my unit, I was voluntold to go report to the base work party for 2 weeks. When I got there, I actually met a guy with the same last name as me, which was pretty unusual given I have a very uncommon last name. He was the first guy I ever met in my 18-year life outside my family that had the same last name as me, so we kind of became instant buds, and got assigned the same duty for those 2 weeks. Range maintenance. Basically we'd go out on the ranges miles and miles behind the main base where infantry, artillery and aircraft all train, i.e. where they throw grenades, fire off mortars and drop one-ton bombs. We would basically rebuild aerial targets, big circles made of tires for aircraft to drop bombs on, dig trenches and run new concertina wire, all while stepping around thousands of unexploded mortars, grenades and various ordnance. You can probably see where I'm going with this. But you'd be wrong. Nothing ever exploded in our faces. Instead, we had a slight mishap running concertina wire one day. In order to handle concertina wire, you need to wear super thick gauntlet-style gloves with metal plating on the palm and fingers, because that shit is sharp as hell. It comes accordioned in a big ring, like a big hula hoop with stupidly sharp razors all around it. These rings were loaded into the back of a 7-ton truck. One person would toss the rings off the truck, then the next person would pick those up and hand it to the next 2 guys, who'd stretch it out and stake it into the ground. Well, my namesake was the guy on the ground picking it up. I don't clearly recall exactly what happened. I think he wasn't paying attention. The guy in the truck threw the ring of concertina wire off the truck and one side of it hit his forearm above the gauntlet, which was just bare skin. The razor wire ripped a massive gash across his arm, and blood literally started spraying out like it was some stupid horror movie. He stood there in complete shock just staring at his arm. Thank God someone was with it enough to grab a towel which was then wrapped around his arm to try to slow the bleeding, but it was still gushing. He was basically shoved into a Humvee as he started passing out, and the guy in charge of our work party tore us off back to base, leaving us out there by ourselves. I never actually found out what happened to my new buddy. He never showed up again at the work party and I never heard a thing about him again. When we were younger, we did a lot more drugs than we're proud of and spent a lot of time with a lot of people we shouldn't have. My boyfriend, now husband, was at the home of a guy who is apparently a pimp. That has nothing to do with the story, but gives you an idea of his character. Meth, blah blah blah, everyone's been up for days. The guy is out of his mind by this point. I think there also may have been some cocaine involved, which didn't help. He pulls out a gun, aims it at my boyfriend's head and pulled the trigger. Click. Apparently the guy's friend took the bullets out a couple of hours before this because of some things he had said. They could sense that he was unstable and might do something crazy. I have no idea what it would have been like had I been there to witness it, but I can't even describe the terror of hearing about this and wondering if he might show some time up to try again. I'd love to say that part of our lives ended right then and there. It didn't. But it's definitely inspiration now to not go back to that. I was out in the bush hiking. On my way back I noticed wolf tracks inside the boot prints I had made on my way in. Pretty unnerving knowing that a pack of wolves has been following you for a couple hours. Rolling 10 times in a car and landing standing up on the driver's side. Most surreal moment of my life. When the cops showed up they assumed I found the wreck and somebody was dead inside the car. I didn't have a scratch on me. So it was also the luckiest moment of my life. Driving 75 down the interstate in Missouri about a month ago, rain starts coming, then a downpour. I pull off the accelerator to about 60, and turn my wipers on all the way. Next thing I see is a sharp turn coming up. I step on the brakes a bit just before the turn, and then I feel the car come up on the water hydroplaning. I can't correct and I'm about to hit the guardrail straight on, where it starts at, not the protective bumper part, so I turn towards the edge of the road hoping the shoulder isn't pulled in water and I can slow down. The car never slowed down, it just kept going, and I yelled to my wife, "Hold on, I can't do anything," and she yelled back something, and we go over. Luckily it was about a 45% grade of grass so we didn't flip, and the car slid down the grass really easily, and we somehow thread the needle between two huge trees growing in the median, and we come to a stop on the exit ramp below us. My wife leans over and turns the flashers on while I gather myself for a few seconds. We turn around, we were pointing towards the exit ramp, and we go down a dirt road. I find a place to stop, get out and look at the car. I just know it is effed and we are 100 miles from home. I lay down on my chest to see what's wrong and there's nothing. No parts hanging off, wheels and tires are fine. I pull some grass out of the grill and that's it. Car's perfectly fine, steering wasn't even messed up at all. Was at a house party 2 years back, and one of my friends had too much to drink and went berserk. It took 4 guys to subdue him. We called the cops and he tried hitting/biting them. In the morning he had zero recollection of what happened and how he ended up in jail. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.